All right, Lucian. How do you suggest we support our teenagers today through their anxiety or depression using astrology as a tool?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. Um, I mean, first thing that comes to my mind is, currently, um, most of the most people who are teenagers right now were born with Pluto in Sagittarius, so they're the Pluto in Sagittarius generation. And what kind of pops in my mind is, I mean, on top of Sagittarius needing to move and explore, um, and kind of reach great heights, which is very hard in this time of COVID, absolutely, um, is also just this search for meaning. Um, what I see in my teenage daughter and her friends, that they, are really struggling with this kind of question of, even just like what's happening, what does this all mean, what's true, um, and when there's kind of this amount of suffering going on, and with things like climate change, um, it's like they need that map, that kind of like Sagittarian map. So I think that kind of lives on a pretty deep Plutonian subconscious level for them, is like that they're on this journey to find meaning. And that is a conversation that comes up from I think the well of anxiety and depression that like every teenager's got to be feeling right now, is this, like, how do you make sense of it?
Oh, absolutely. Do you know off the top of your head what that Pluto and Sagittarius generation spans through?
Yeah, late 90s, 90, maybe even starting in 1995, 96. And then we know that Pluto went into Capricorn in 2008.
Mm,
So it's about a
96.
12-year, 13-year span. Um, yeah, so there are the people who are on the younger side of teens may have been born in, I guess, kids born in 2008 would be turning 13 this year. So that's a whole other generational uh, task. Um, and I think in general, I mean, uh, teenagers' search for meaning is like an ongoing, like that seems like probably beyond just the Pluto in Sagittarius generation.
Mhm.
Um, but
And
also that, go ahead.
no, I want you to finish your thought.
Oh, I'm just saying, I'm sure that's quite advanced in them, and also just the time they're being they were born into, kind of after the birth, right after the birth of the internet, and growing up experiencing September 11th and how that changed, at least the consciousness in the U.S. Um, and having to face things like climate change and global warming. Um, that they've just grown up being more exposed to kind of like this dark side or the shadow side of humanity. Um,
Yeah. And specifically in this very moment, the isolation, right, of the
yeah,
lockdowns and um, the prevalent fear in our collective. Is
yeah.
there um, anywhere else that you would go in the chart to find some support to, or some insights into how to support
Mm.
your teenager?
Yeah, well, I mean, um, I guess their whole chart would count, and um, obviously, if you have a someone with a lot of heavy Capricorn or something like that, like having them read Man's Search for Meaning won't necessarily, um, inspire them. But you could also look at where Jupiter is in their chart as the ruler of Sagittarius, and what house and what sign that is in, to kind of glean how that particular search for meaning, what area of life is that going to unfold in, or that they'll be the most interested in. Yeah.
And in your practice as a psychotherapist, is there a practice that you've continued to come back to when you're working with teens in this generation in order to help
Well, I
lift
haven't
them
worked
out of
with a ton of teens um, in a long time, and in general, psychotherapy for teens, like, it tends to be better to work through the arts, or go on a walk with them. They don't do well being stuck in a room with somebody who, at least their perception is, I'm there to like analyze them, or somehow something's really wrong with them. So I think, if anything, teens need more of that kind of mentorship. I mean, parents, of course, are really important, but there's also this, like, um, unique experience of having another adult in your life, whether it's a teacher, or some of a friend's parent who you feel like sees you and kind of gets you, and there's no strings attached. It's a very delicate kind of period. So in the kind of frame I use for these 7-year cycles, from 14 to 21 is ruled by Venus. And there's, I mean, the archetype of Venus can be seen as that, like, the social realm, that, like, connecting with others. And it's also about, like, what you have sympathy with, right? Like, oh, I love this sort of music, or this is the color I want to dye my hair, or um, all these kind of Venusian qualities. And then the kind of inner Venus, which is like, how do I feel about everything, right? Like, teenagers are like, can have a really hard time separating, like, their thoughts from what they feel about something. So I think the arts are really productive. I think the phones have, on some level, offered teenagers a creative outlet, but at least what I've seen compared to when I was a teen in the 90s, it seems like there's far less art happening, like far less music being played, far less art happening, that kind of creativity that, like, really feeds the soul at that age. Um, yeah, no, the only thing I would add, just like in terms of tools for parents, is uh, not doing the authoritarian thing, that just doesn't, like, work with teens, right? Offering guidance and, like, healthy boundaries, but um, it's really hard to make a teenager do anything without their motivation. And then, just like, hormonally and what their brains are doing, it's almost like being 3 or 4 years old again, where there's just so much happening on a daily basis, that having a lot of patience with them. Like, my daughter, who's 16, is incredibly responsible, and she's a Virgo, and she's very orderly and stuff like that. And since she kind of hit about 14, it's like she's forgetful. She doesn't put things away. It's like, it's very much back to, like, being 4 or 5 years old or something like that.
wow.
And that's normal. Yeah.
That's that's fantastic to think about, because as I've had my 3 and then 4 and now 5-year-old, I've had moments where I've been like, oh my gosh, she's just a mini teenager. So
Yes, exactly. And the moods, and yeah, especially teenage boys. I mean, little boys, uh, get these like testosterone spikes that happen, so they'll get really intense or really moody. And it very much is like, oh my God, they're being like a teenager. And then when they're teenagers, it's like, oh, you're being just like a 3-year old. So, the arc of like human development is, I think they're finding now that it's 26 or 27 till the brain and the nervous system have like fully developed, um, which is almost a full Saturn cycle. Um, so yeah, we take a long time to like fully show up, um, and even then, it can take even longer.
so to attempt to summarize, patience is kind of number one. Compassion for where they're at and coming from a authoritarian stance in
Hmm.
your attempt to support your teen. Um, Bringing in art as much as possible as a means of creative outlet and exploration. Going out on a walk to talk rather than sitting down to um, interrogate your teenager about how they're
Hmm.
feeling. And then just generally getting creative about how to support the Pluto and Sagittarius generations innate need for the quest for meaning,
Yes.
um, which could include books. It could include the arts. It could include conversation.
Right.
What else could it include? What are some other ideas?
Well, going to books, I think of like, even books like Siddhartha. I mean, some of these books they try to make them read in high school, uh, kind of for a reason, or Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning if they're a little bit older. Um, it doesn't even have to be a book that involves um, laying out, oh, here's the meaning of life, but just things that like really live with that question, right? A lot of teenagers, depending on their temperament, are like a weird mix between hedonists and existentialists, right? Like they're and like trying to figure it all out. And especially right now, it's like there's this sense, right, that like what we don't really know what the future looks like. I mean, I feel like, you know in kind of ordinary times, there's this kind of predictability around the future that we at least believe we have. And I feel like right now that has like all been scrambled, um, and which is hard for adults, like it's who meditate or know about astrology, or I think about that all the time, like how lucky we are to know about astrology right now, because it literally is like this giant clock of meaning, um, uh, that allows us to kind of feel into the future a little bit in a meaningful way. And I think that's why, um, more teens are getting interested in astrology, right? That's why all these horoscope uh, apps are getting popular, and um, is because it offers some sort of symbolic kind of sense of meaning.
Mm.
Yeah.
Oh, and the last thing I forgot that you had mentioned, it's looking potentially at where Jupiter is in the chart. So if you are if you know how to pull up a chart, and you know what to look for, looking at where your child's Jupiter is in their chart and
Right.
the sign that they're that it's in will also help give you extra insight into where
Yeah,
they.
where they might find meaning. If they have a seventh house Jupiter, then like, one-on-one relationships or romantic relationships are going to give them a sense of meaning. If it's in their ninth house, it's going to be travel or astrology or something, like that. Or, um, yeah, I think that is a good way to kind of start that process. And then also looking at Venus too, like, because it really is, um, the religion of youth is beauty to some degree, right?
Mm,
Um, Although we might argue what is beautiful, like what they think is beautiful might be different than ours, but that is, um, I think that's a very true statement. So
mm. Great. Thank you, Lucian.
yeah, thank you.